right, so I have officially hit the record button and I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. My name is Natalie Manning. I am the outreach specialist for the Gentilly Resilience District portfolio of projects. And I will be your point of contact if you have any questions relating to this project from a city perspective and or any of the other projects that are included in the Gentilly Resilience District portfolio. This Zoom teleconference is being recorded and all of the others have been recorded as well and are available on the city's website for public consumption. And I typically put them up within the next day or so. I try to do it right after, but so you should be able to access that tomorrow. And I'll send a link to the page so that you can easily access that. One thing, just a few house rules, if you could just keep your microphone muted if you're not speaking to cut back on any feedback that we might get off of your line. And if you feel comfortable doing so, please share your role in this project, whether you are a resident or a project partner and what that role is as a partner. That'd be greatly appreciated. You can share it with the entire group in the chat box, or if you just want to share it directly, you can send that to either Sarah Woodward or myself. So I will hand it over to Sarah to kick off our finale of the Meet the Artist series.
All right, thanks so much, Natalie. So I think most of you on the call kind of know the drill, but this is the fourth of our Meet the Artist online events, and the focus of today is really to hear from community members, partners. Our artists are in the preliminary stages of their proposals, and so they're really eager to hear what you have to say about them to kind of help inform the next steps in finalizing their proposals. So the four artists that we have today are Courtney Egan, Brendon Palmer-Angell, Christine Ledoux, and Caitlin Waugh. So the way this is going to work is that we will watch each of the 3-minute videos for each artist together, and then we'll open up for discussion. And truly anything you want to share is appreciated. All the artists are really excited to hear from you all. The artwork is going to go in Gatto Park, Fillmore Park, and one additional location. So we're really eager to hear from Gentilly and St. Anthony neighborhood residents. So one thing that I'd love to encourage everyone who's on the call, for those who couldn't actually join for each of the online events, we're really encouraging people to go onto our site where they can look at all of the videos and give feedback to artists that way. So please, if anyone asks, even if they miss the event, please encourage everyone to give their feedback through that alternate route. So again, everyone, please make use of the chat box to leave comments, ask questions along the way. That'll help us document your feedback, both whatever you'd like to say and join the chorus in, and what you'd like to say on the chat box. So thanks so much. We're gonna have about 20 minutes for each artist, so we'll have to kind of keep things moving along to make sure we have time for everyone. We are asking for those who are available to stay a bit past 7 until 7:20 so that we can take a look at Caitlin's final video and give her some feedback on that. So for anyone who can stay, we'd really appreciate your extra time. And if there are no questions, I will hand it off to Erin to pull up Courtney Egan's video.
Hi, my name is Courtney Egan, and I'm a media artist. I've worked as an artist in New Orleans since 1991. In my artwork, I work with time a lot. I look closely at plants and how they move and change over time. And I also look closely at people and how people's attention span changes and moves over time. As a civic arts fellow, I've been able to delve into the history of the Gentilly neighborhood and understand how the neighborhood has changed over recorded time. I'm really into bridges. The idea started with piers. I grew up walking on piers and just wanting to go explore on piers. I felt it was magical walking over water. So I thought the bridges would be very attractive to children in the neighborhood. Bridges that would carry them over the bioswale so they wouldn't have the urge to run through the bioswale. I like this idea because bridges are strong symbols. They link things, they make connections, they build connections between things, for instance, between generations. And I started thinking about the bridges as being a way to transmit information and knowledge about the unique features of the Fillmore Park installation in particular. As I was looking at the diagrams of the park, I noticed that there was a long strip of bioswale along Wingate and another long strip along Wild Air that really didn't have a way to cross into the field from the street. I noticed that there were 2 bridges near the playground side of the park. My proposal involves bridges that would help facilitate neighbors walking into the field from the sidewalk. So it would direct foot traffic over the bioswale so people would not go into the bioswale. So one of the bridges I'm imagining is about the bioswale plants. It would have art on it and language that would reference the specific plants planted in the Fillmore Park installation. The other bridge would have a form that would reflect the water storage chambers that are buried invisible underneath the field. There would be a series of arches that you walk through as if you're under the field inside those water storage chambers. And there would be handrails that would go between the arches in a wave formation. The bridges would be easily visible from the street. They would not disrupt the hydrology. I do want both bridges to include words and language that can serve as a touchstone so that children can ask parents, why is this word on here? And the parents can tell the story of what features are in the park under the field that help the neighborhood stay dry.
Courtney, I have a question. On one of your drawings, I saw a little note on the archways that said LED strips. I'm just curious if that's an element of it as well that didn't make it into the video.
I'm interested in using LED, but only if they can be solar powered in some way. So I'm not really sure about that technology. That's something that I would like to have, though, and it could be an added feature for the park and a safety feature as well to some degree. Lights that would stay on for a certain amount of time in the evening. Can I say a few things?
Please.
So the project is, as someone who works with photography and film, the metal work is out of my wheelhouse, most definitely. However, I want to say that my point of entry into this project is the bioswales. As someone who has worked with plants a lot, I have come to love ditches, and a bioswale being a much broader version of ditch is something that I'm really very appealing to me. Ditches are traditionally considered places that are dirty. You don't want to go in them. My mother is petrified of snakes as I go walking around ditches over here. But, as a plant person, ditches are these pockets of plant biodiversity just because it's the place where the mower doesn't go. So you can find a lot of the native and non-native, but certainly hidden things growing there in abundance. And then I'm also really thrilled that the bioswales are part of the water management plan for the neighborhood and that they are coming into prominence. But I also think that there's certainly an educational component that needs to occur with them, just because people in New Orleans aren't really used to dealing with ditches and bioswales much. So, I see that a bridge could be a way of providing a path for people to go. It would reduce the foot traffic into a bioswale, and it would help preserve the bioswale and the functioning of the bioswale. I'm not set on the design right now. I plan to work with a fabricator And I would love for it to be a community-led process where the design of the bridge is partially worked out with community members. And then I do have a learning curve in terms of safety and things like that, that I would be certainly reaching out to people to help me work with that. Guess I'm curious to know if people are interested in, if community members are interested in working with me and possibly the metal fabricator to come up with design ideas for the bridge. I think another component of the bridge is just the fact that it can help educate about the water storage under the field, because that'll be an invisible component of the whole water management process or Gentilly neighborhood specific feature that people will forget about, and generations will certainly forget about. I mean, after the flooding and Katrina, I was amazed to learn how many flood events had happened over the course of New Orleans' history, and how those get forgotten about as generations continue and proceed. So that's kind of my thought process, using public art as a way to spur conversation and hopefully to transmit knowledge across generations. And I'm open for feedback, comments.
Courtney, is what you're doing similar to what is happening at the Levee Breach site?
I'm sorry, at which site?
The Levee Breach site on Warrington and Mirbeau.
Mm-hmm.
There's an educational component along the side, the sidewall.
Well, I'm not really interested in informational placards like you would have at that site, but it's more like the information gets communicated in very simple but effective ways through the design of the bridge. So in some ways, integrating the specific plants that are going to be in that Fillmore area, I'm thinking Fillmore specifically, into the design function of the bridge, possibly including their names in it, thinking about how to make those features and their importance of water absorption obvious for people who use and utilize the bridge, and for kids who might want to run on the bridge and play on it, and then they can also have this opportunity to learn about it too. So yes, I'm interested. I was a teacher for 20 years, and I'm always thinking about art as an educational possibility and opportunity. So that's one of the things that are important to me, especially making a piece of public art in New Orleans, because I think that in a place like New Orleans, there's a certain responsibility that comes along with the public. I'm all for art's sake, and art as a transmitter of unmitigated joy, but I'm also very interested in having pieces that will communicate educationally and help people understand their place, not their place, but their environment.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear, maybe from the design team around some of the conversations that have happened to date. I know, so yesterday, Annette and I from the Arts Council walked around Fillmore and Gatto, just getting the word out about the artist proposals and letting community members know how they could give input both during these events and outside. And I talked to one woman who was talking about Fillmore and how active that walking path is, and how many people in the mornings come out and really use that path as a place for exercise. And so I think that, the bridge, it's cool to think about the the bridge as a physical connection between the field and the walking path that, you know, so many kids and adults are using, but also as this kind of conceptual bridge of what's happening, you know, above and below the ground. But I think that the bridges would get a lot of visibility from community members who are really actively using that walking path and thinking about, you know, the connections between the field and that space. So
yeah, and that is a main reason why I would love to have the community in on the design process. I did want to say that I was speaking with Caitlin, as she referenced last week, about the possibility of a second piece, the second idea that we had, which I think we both have placed on the back burner. But, you know, plowing forward here. So
I'm a fan of the directness of the messaging that especially the image that you had with the palmettos and the irises, and whether that's inscribed or cut out of a piece of metal or fabricated in some other way, and just imagining a kid growing up in that neighborhood and passing by that every day on their way to the field, and the ways in which you're kind of interweaving text and images, and how that can kind of redound out to other experiences as they see those same plants and shapes and forms and words in other parts of the city.
cool.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, you know, I'm not sure that we've had specific input, you know, and Erin, you know, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong too, but that I would totally tie to this proposal right now. But I would say that I like the idea of creating sort of these multiple points of entry. I think that's good. You know, it's always nice to kind of, you kind of see paths of desire developed, or like, you know, kind of people cutting through when you don't have sort of those multiple paths. And so I think that's a good and interesting idea for sure. And like Erin, I also like the overall sort of direction, particularly the ability for community collaboration, because I do think that that is a key thing that we have heard interest in from a lot of folks, is just, you know, how can some of these art pieces be collaboratively designed and thought about. So that's also, I think, very cool.
yeah, I could definitely imagine some really exciting bridge design workshops with kids and families.
Yeah, I like the idea of having the bridges inviting people to get onto the field, because people sometimes don't walk on fields. You know, they stay on the sidewalk, but because there's a bridge, it's inviting people to have picnics on the field, to just, and I do like the design of the project. It's very engaging. It's the level of the design, as Erin said, is very inviting, you know, and anyone walking with their kids, or just, you know, people can read those words and understand, especially if those flowers are around. Beautiful concept, Courtney.
Oh, thank you, Joycelyn. You know, I think that engaging the community and work.
I also really, that comment about
Go ahead.
can you hi, it's Caitlin. I really like that idea of the paths of desire, that idea that maybe choosing where the placement of them is really driven by the paths of even though the space isn't created, just thinking about how you choose where those are, and as opposed to kind of plunking them down, and really thinking about how the space is used, like which houses are where, and how, like, making that kind of convenient. And I also really like the idea, I'm really fascinated by the shapes underneath the field, and that idea of showing instead of telling what's going on underneath the field seems really very compelling to me. So yeah, there can kind of show pictures, but really to have the actual, some sort of smaller replicas end up showing, like really having you feel it, seems, yeah, compelling.
Cool.
Thank you for that feedback, because I had been thinking about the field so much. I hadn't really thought about, what would be directly across from them, like which houses would be across from the bridges, and the importance of that.
Right. All right, everyone. Well, if you have any further thoughts, feel free to drop them in the chat box, or you can always give Courtney feedback again online. I'm going to move us on to Brendon's proposal. Thanks so much, Courtney.
Thank you.
I'm Brendon Palmer-Angell. I'm a portrait artist working small in the studio with drawing and painting, and large scale on the street in spray paint. I focus mainly in portraiture. A lot of my interest in portraiture is in humanizing individuals. I feel like we're disconnected from each other in a lot of different ways. And I feel like portrait art is a way to sit with a person and their humanity to get to know them better. I've done a lot of memorial portraits, pieces to sort of celebrate people who have passed historically. I feel that the climate crisis is one of the biggest existential crises for our time. And in New Orleans, living with water is sort of an overarching problem that impacts the way that we do everything. But it's also a fundamental underlying part of the beauty of the region that we live in. I was really drawn to this project to be able to work with community members on an issue that affects all of us, and to try to shed light on the problems that we're dealing with. Most of my public art up till now has been with spray paint. This new piece would include that as an element, but it would also be multidimensional. It's not just the idea of a surface to paint a portrait on, but how it relates to the Gentilly Resilience District as a whole. One image that really struck me as we were touring Gentilly was looking back from the pump station and seeing not only the underground canal that brings stormwater back to the pump stations, but above that, this little girl riding her bike. And it just really struck me how invisible a lot of these systems are that keep water moving in our city. I was thinking about how to make that more visible for us. So the imagery that I'm working with in the piece is sort of an above ground reflection of the underwater storage tanks that would be under Gato Playground, which is the location that I'm thinking about the most. It's sort of this archway shape, and within it is a young girl holding a vessel. I wanted it to be not only about holding water, I'd like the final piece to also be a part of the storage system. So I'm imagining it as having depth and being able to hold stormwater and be part of that sort of metered release of stormwater after a big rain event. There's this idea of her hair having cutouts in it for the Katrina rose vines to grow up. Questions for me right now are how to actually make it into a holding tank. I'd also like it to become a basis for a community space. So the idea of also holding space. I'm experimenting with the idea of building sort of like a shelter off of the back of it that could be a place for people to gather and also provide shade and some of the beauty of nature. This idea of her holding water is about future generations and what we're asking them to hold in the future with climate change.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Great. So a really interesting dovetail there with Courtney's proposal. I just wanted to share an image real quick that didn't end up in the video. Just that idea of the reflection of those archways. And then also just thinking about locations within Gato Playground. I'm thinking of it as sort of a contemplative, healing outdoor space for community members to gather. Obviously, with the pandemic, that changes a lot of things, but I feel like an outdoor space would go a long way. And then also just wanted to show this idea with the shade canopies. I feel like shade is a big, an important element, obviously here in the South with sun and everything. This image isn't to scale for the space so much, but I'm just thinking about where to place that. I think in retrospect, this location sort of facing the playground might not be the best for sort of a quiet space, but I would love feedback on that. Obviously they're doing amazing things with Gato, so or if there's another location that anyone can think of. So yeah, and I'm open to everyone's feedback on absolutely everything. I know this looks pretty fleshed out. I guess the drawing went to more of a concrete place than I thought it would be to begin with. But I'm really open to any ideas on imagery, on especially on how to involve the community in this process, and yeah, how to involve community imagery. I was thinking of her as like a very young girl, maybe between 4 and 10. Just really like a visual reminder of the next generation who will be sort of bearing the burden of climate change. So it's not just the reminder of the underground infrastructure, but also a reminder of sort of the shared challenge that we have that we're all holding. In a way, I feel like sort of anxiety even, or challenges, but it's really important to me that it's hopeful imagery. And so that's something I would love to hear more about too, is just whether this is sort of tone deaf, or I know there are a lot of reminders of the challenges of living with water here in New Orleans, but I'd love it to be more inspirational. So I'd love to hear any thoughts on any of this. And of course, feel free to reach out to me directly after all this as well.
I really love the imagery of the young girl. This is one of the projects where I think we've had the most youth engagement. And when I saw that, I immediately thought of 2 of the young girls that often, I'm sorry, my dog is crazy, that often come to the events that we have for St. Anthony. I immediately thought of that. And it made me feel really hopeful about the future. Because these projects aren't just about being resilient for now, they're about being sustainable for future generations. So, I mean, it literally is in their hands, the future of not only, the city of New Orleans, but the future of the globe and the entire world. So it made me feel very hopeful that the drawing that you showed.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie. And for me too, I guess sort of the kind of a primary audience. I mean, it is obviously in their hands, but I also want it to be a reminder of how right now it's in our hands. Like, it's very much like with the pandemic, it's not visible in a really extreme way yet, but like we're in the driver's seat very much like the pandemic. And I'd love for it to be sort of a beacon, a reminder of the responsibility that we have as adults for the next generation, so that their cup isn't so full.
Brendon, can you talk a little bit about the material the mural is going to be on, and the water piece you talked about that's in front of the mural, that's possibly in front of the mural?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking right now is using a CNC cut metal to make the shapes for the tank, and then having it welded together. Obviously, this is, again, out of my wheelhouse, but I know there are a lot of great metal workers out there who could advise on this. But my understanding is that CNC work is relatively inexpensive. I have a quote with someone on cutting those shapes out. but I'm super open to ideas. But so the portrait itself would be on the holding tank. So the idea is that it would be that whole metal structure, and then have an image. And something I didn't illustrate in there too was that obviously there are two sides to that. One side would be that within that sort of space that's created by the Peggy Martin roses and the lattice work, but there would be a backside too. Part of why I was thinking originally about that spot in Gato was that there's a really beautiful line of sight as you're coming up Windsor, looking into you would be able to see it across the field, sort of under this amazing oak tree. It wouldn't be under the oak tree, but you can see under the oak tree there's a clear line of sight. But so I haven't addressed that other imagery either, and so that I'm super open to ideas on that too.
Also, when I saw the image and I saw her hair, I envisioned that being like water. I don't know if that's technically, but the hair appearing as streaming water. That's what I immediately thought about. And it looked like there were water droplets drawn into that, but I just imagined the hair around her face being like a stream of water.
Oh, wow. That's great. I'm just writing that down. Yeah, originally those teardrops were going to be cutouts for the rose vines to grow on, but I really like that idea. An interesting thought that came up with the idea of a holding tank also was having weep holes in it, so that as it filled up, you could actually see how full it was with water coming out of it through the side. So that would be an interesting way to integrate that, to have actually water coming out. But I would love to hear from design team too. Maybe that's a side conversation, but just how feasible this is, or necessary. I know there's also that water main that goes through the middle of Gato, and so I don't know if tying it into the underground storage tanks would be ideal, but maybe just using the permeability of the earth itself to release over time. And then the other idea was having those awning structures feed into this holding tank.
I was in Washington, D.C. last fall, and we went to several exhibits where green infrastructure designers have built green walls. And so Natalie was thinking about, her hair representing water. It'd be great to have like plants. You were talking about the weep holes, and it would be neat to have plants that could be watered from those weep holes. But then I thought, well, it doesn't rain a lot, but then you just mentioned a water line. So, I mean, in times of when it wouldn't rain, that would be a perfect irrigation source through tiny, tiny little holes, so it wouldn't be like a huge water waster. It would be a very conservative, efficient way to water any plants that were growing vertically on the walls.
That's a great idea.
I'm curious, Brendon, and maybe this is more, it would be clear if by looking at the sketch again, but how you're thinking about the interaction, like people's interaction with it. Are you envisioning it as a sort of a sitting space, or what is the sort of the like human interaction with the space, or what happens in that space?
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that is a challenge for me too. I guess I was thinking about more of a contemplative spot, reflective, just that whole idea of holding space in sort of a healing way. So yeah, sitting would definitely be a part of it. But also recognize that it could be a multi-use spot. I know, people will meet sort of around public art, or even under a particular tree for yoga class or meditation or community organizing. Even something like, the organizing that we need to do in terms of sort of preserving the future for the youth around climate change. I would love for a space like this to be used for that, but that is something that I struggle with. It's a good feedback.
I like that idea. Like perhaps there is an extension of your design that helps really that really feeds into those benches or those tables or that whatever might be useful to really truly encourage that to happen without it creating something that needs maintenance and upkeep. There's probably some like simple ways in which that can happen.
Great, thanks, Caitlin.
Something to think about, that field gets fairly heavy use with teenagers playing football, and the games I've seen are generally kind of on a north-south axis in relation to the sun. And so just when you think about placement, it's not that yours was super in the way, but try and find ways to, I think, not just for the football, but finding ways to integrate. And I think this is true. I'm thinking about Courtney's proposal and Rachel's, and finding ways to integrate. So like I'm imagining your sculpture proposal and where that could go. And I think integrating it more amongst trees would help you do a number of things. I think the integration would I think be meaningful for the concepts that you're proposing, and it would allow you to not have to worry as much about the shade structure. I really appreciate the kind of attention being paid to providing shade for residents, but it's such a big add-on, because all of a sudden now you're talking about foundations for your shade structures, and those aren't, and that whole thing in of itself isn't going to be cheap. And so I'm wondering, by tucking it more amongst the trees, you don't have it in the way of football and other activities, and you can rely on the trees to provide the shade. It'll take some time for a full canopy to develop, but I think rather than adding yet another structure into the park, it may make more sense to focus on the sculpture as something that's freestanding and that works from every direction. I think the shade canopy also, I think it forces a little bit of frontality, or like a certain dominant axis. I wonder, especially with Gatto, because it's more organic in its forms, that having a structure or a concept that works from multiple angles, to me, I think would make more sense for Gatto, because you'll have as many people using it on the field side as on the playground side. So it'd be hard for me to say like which side your sculpture should be facing.
Gotcha. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Cool. All right.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I had a similar reaction on kind of like which way to face, and thinking that was a really tough question. So because I agree that sort of the field and the playground are both anticipated to get a lot of use. I do like the fact that the sort of structure is permeable as kind of lattice work. I think that's important, because one thing that we have heard a lot from community members is about visibility. So just making sure that there is visibility kind of through the structure, particularly sort of the large arched, portion that is adjacent to the painting. I think in the mural, I think is going to be important to folks.
Is that a security consideration, Alex, or what have you heard?
Be able to see around them.
Great.
Also, I just saw that Landry Young just joined. Not to put you on the spot, but he lives right on Gatto Playground. So if you have any thoughts to share, I would encourage.
Thank you for joining, Landry.
Hi. Yeah, we like the idea that Aaron proposed. Can't wait to see more. I have my wife right here too. So.
And they have kids.
Awesome. Oh, awesome. Yeah, Landry, if you're okay with it, I'd love to reach out and hear your thoughts more, just about that area and everything, but I don't want to hog time from.
Okay, yeah, I'm here to listen.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Brendon. I am going to move us on to Christine Ledoux now.
Hi, I'm Christine Ledoux. I'm originally from Southwest Louisiana. I've been living and working in New Orleans for the past 12 years. I'm a self-taught mixed media mosaic artist. I work from a home studio in the Bywater Arts Lofts. My obsession with mosaics started in 1999 when I came across a book at my local library. I'd experimented with other mediums, and one of them was stained glass. When I realized that I could use it in mosaics, I fell in love with the art form. My approach to my mosaic pieces are very spontaneous. I don't usually work from a plan or pattern. I just let my materials guide my creative process. I love working with glass. I like the way the light reflects off of my pieces and gives it some movement. I also create fused glass tile. That way I can manipulate color and pattern, and it makes the pieces unique to me. For a large-scale mosaic application, I start building the mosaic in sections. I use a fiberglass mosaic mesh. Once the sections are complete, they can be transported to any location to be installed. I think coming from 3 generations of rice and crawfish farmers, I can relate to the Gentilly Resilience Project. Understanding the ebbs and flows of water played a big part in my life. Being near the river and seeing ships float above the streets in my neighborhood makes me very aware of the relationship between water and the city. Since moving to New Orleans, I've had the opportunity to work with the community through workshops and classes. One of my community projects was a courtyard bench at Yaya's Creative Arts Center. Students were encouraged to design and create parts and pieces that were incorporated into the mosaic. I'm proposing a mosaic sculpture with a water motif for the Fillmore Park site. I think having the community be a part of the creative process and making tile to incorporate into the mosaic creates a sense of inclusion, not only in the fabrication of the sculpture, but also in the awareness of the park and its purpose to mitigate flooding in the neighborhood. The shape of the sculpture would be a column using concrete, approximately 30 inches in diameter and 7 feet in height. The sculpture represents the relationship between water, the community, and our city.
All right. Thanks.
Great.
Christine.
Yes.
So how heavy is, here's the engineer in me. I was just thinking out loud, how, depending on how heavy the glass is, it may, I'm just thinking of something that could be just as strong, well, not as strong, but strong enough and probably less bulky, expensive, whatever you want to call it, than a concrete column. My only comment was, I think maybe we could work with the designers. There could potentially be something that's not as heavy as concrete that could be utilized as a base.
Sure. I have worked with other fabricators, and we could use possibly fiberglass. And I would also have to work with the design team to see how, we could mount a column, which I was proposing.
Thank you.
Sure. Is there any, I think my question would be to the community members and the residents, how many members would like to be involved in the process, in the creative process? Because working with other community projects, like noted in the video with Yaya, it always seems to bring a sense of ownership and pride to, and a connection to the community, and ownership of a piece. And like I said, I was proposing for the Fillmore area along the walking path. And I don't have the Fillmore playground site, but I'm thinking of that as a focal point along the walking path across from the playground. I think there is, it's noted in section number 8, and they're going to have shade trees and things, and I thought maybe it would fit well there. The whole project is about awareness with water, for the community to build a relationship with water. You hear about it, we live with it, but you don't see it, you don't get to experience it. And I think it's surrounding the neighborhood behind the walls, and this way we could bring it, into the community, and having the community members of all ages help create tile that we can incorporate it into the mosaic. And also I'm very open for a design using a water motif where they can help in that aspect, as far as designing a pattern, the pattern of and shapes for the motif, the water motif.
Christine, I have a couple questions. Like, how, because I'm not an artist, how do you see the community being involved? And you said a little bit about the images, but you would probably come up with the images or give the community different options for images?
Yes, well, by holding workshops and classes, I could help, the community members would help in the design of the overall design for the sculpture, which as far as the pattern, the mosaic that goes on it, but they could be hands-on where they're helping make tile and parts and pieces, and then it gives a sense of inclusion, and like I said, it brings a great sense of ownership and pride, and having to be a part of the whole creative process.
Mm-hmm. Christine, I was just curious about the shape of the column. I know at various points you were thinking about different fiberglass shapes or structures versus mosaic inlay, something that might be kind of more organic, that would come off of a kind of freestanding element. So I'm just curious kind of what brought you to that. And
well, I think having the shape is very organic, and also in architectural aspect, it gives some strength and stability, and bringing the water, the water pattern onto it. But I'm open for other shapes. Like I said, the community could help with ideas on other shapes that we could do the mosaics on.
yeah, I think for me, I know that Erin and Alex kind of put together some thinking about how it might work to incorporate mosaic into sidewalks or, some of the concrete pads that are going onto the playground. But, and so I don't know what the various elements of trickiness are in terms of coordinating construction schedules and things like that. But I think there's a lot of really exciting potential to think about both the freestanding form and also something, some other elements that might come off of that and be kind of embedded into the environment in different ways. So So that's just something that I'm personally interested in and curious about exploring.
Yeah, I think this is a cool proposal. I mean, one thing I will say, just as one of the designers, I think that seeing the freestanding column, you're kind of like, like that's so much easier to deal with in some ways than like trying to integrate it into the other portions, just because that requires so much more kind of timing and coordination with the contractor. Whereas for something like this, it's like easier to just sort of say, okay, well, we can put the pad for that and then it can go on whenever, you know? So in terms of like timing and coordination, something that doesn't necessarily extend out into the environment is easier, but at the same time, I definitely see the attractiveness of trying to make that happen. So I think there's certainly something to be said for like seeing what we can do about that, but also noting that that just comes with more, basically what happens is when we have more kind of need for coordination with the contractors who are actually building the park, in terms of saying like either you're going to have to get your stuff done at the exact same time as we are, or we're going to need to just like say that there's actually going to be like kind of a hole in the track, for example, until you're kind of done with your piece, which is not necessarily ideal, right? So just trying to kind of figure out how that can work, but liking the idea of something a little bit more freestanding, just because I think it makes a lot of the questions about just like, how do we really do this like responsibly? It minimizes those in some ways.
Right, thank you. Because I did have some concerns and working with the inlays, and I know that the benches have already been planned because, you know, we could have did inlays on or overlays on the benches also. So I think that's why I went with the vertical structure.
I think it's a nice. I think it's a strong. The verticality of it is a nice contrast to the flatness of the park and to the bioswales and everything else that's going on at Fillmore. I think the round shape of it plays off of is a nice addition to the rectangular form of the park as well, and including something like that, I think adds another eye-catching element that I think would be really strong in Fillmore.
All right, thanks, Aaron.
I can imagine people counting their laps, because it's such a heavily used walking path, counting their laps as they walk past the post.
Right.
You know,
right. I like the idea of this.
Right, a lot of walking too, and from what I've gone out to Fillmore several times during the day, and people are using that track, you know, the walking path, and just having something like I said, another focal point for them to look at, just like like in City Park when you visit the sculpture garden in the new addition, and also here up on Crescent City Park. I live a block away, but knowing that, you know, the water is there, but I can't see it unless I go up there. But there's, you know, that was my whole concept of bringing, you know, the water into the space, but into, you know, as far as the sculpture and bringing the community into the creative process.
This is maybe a little bit obvious, but I think thinking about your use of glass and the way some of your mosaic elements might refract the light bouncing off of it, and thinking about Courtney's proposal and Brendon's, I think in each case, the path of the way light interacts, the way sunlight interacts with each of your proposals, I think is really important. Like with Courtney, the shadows that are cast, if you have these cutouts that are cast into the bioswale or onto the surrounding landscape, and how that further enriches the overall ensemble.
I think one thing that's really exciting about the mosaic possibility is that, you know, there's so many opportunities for further, you know, community building and relationship building, because it's such a tactile and hands-on element. And I think I mean, anytime I've done a mosaic workshop, it just brings people in out of curiosity. And I think that there's a lot that you could do to bring community members' ideas about imagery into the design, both in kind of finalizing what those images are, but also then in actually executing on the final proposal. I'm sure that's why you love mosaics too.
Thank you.
A small technical thing, you might want to, you're probably gonna want to think about the top of the column a bit for how water sheds off of it. With the mosaic, you're gonna have a lot of water channeling off in these ways, so have longer lasting coping at the top. Or do you wrap the mosaic all the way around and have it be kind of domed to drainage?
All the way around, and I've talked to several contractors as far as the concrete column and giving it, you know, a little bit of angle on the top to where the water doesn't just sit and it will, you know, run off. Still in the works, but thank you, Erin. That's a great point.
All right.
You probably wouldn't want birds to be spending a lot of time sitting up there either.
No, and I think because of the reflection of the glass and they you know, I have other pieces over in St. Landry Parish where we did fiddles and things to bring in the Cajun culture. A lot of the other sculptures, they did have, you know, wildlife that were nesting, and I think some reflection, so they kind of stayed away from my pieces, which was it was a big concern for members there too. Thanks, Steph.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Christine. It's great to hear from you. And for those who can stay on, I know it's a bit late, but we'd love for you to stay to watch Caitlin's proposal again and have some conversation about that.
My name is Caitlin Ezel-Wah. I am a glass artist. I use mixed media as well. Primarily, I work with glass and mirror. I own my own business, which is called Parif, and then I also have a small gallery that I co-own that's on Magazine Street uptown called Potence. I fuse plants between glass in the kiln, and then it leaves the ash of the plant behind, and that lets me make panes of glass that help preserve people's wedding flowers or make ceremonial space with medicinal flowers or altar spaces. All of my work is based on the natural world, on plants, on organic forms. Making space that feels sacred, that feels comfortable, that is functional is a big driver of my work. I gravitated towards this project because I'm looking to make a shift in my career and really wanting to make larger pieces that that function for society in a more meaningful and more holistic way. When we were doing our initial tours in January, there were two things that really grabbed my attention the most: how much plastic is getting into the waterways. Most people in the community would be really surprised by the quantity. And then I also, when we were at the levee breach site, I had a really deep desire to look over the levee wall, and there's not a great way to do that. And I've been developing the idea that you could have a porch or a structure that was high enough that you could see out over the levee wall. The idea is that there would be 3 structures and you'd get to them with ramps. All 3 structures would basically look the same. I would like to be able to see out of each structure along the railings or below the railing. I am hoping to incorporate the plastic bottles from the pump station into the structures. So I would like to show what can be done with trash that's headed into our waterways. And so the thought is that the bottles would represent where the river is and where the lake is. I've been looking at all these beautiful images from pinhole cameras that track over time the the way that the sun and the moon go through the sky. And so I've been thinking a lot about how those plastic bottles could be in designs in the ceiling as well to track the sun and the moon's patterns. I'd really like for the bottom of each structure underneath to be reflective, to be mirror, so that it reflects what's underneath it and looks like it's floating in a way. So the notion is that they're making community space. Ideally, there would be a table and chairs in each one of the structures so that they really can be used to have meals and gather. And then you'd be centered of the sun and the moon and the lake and the river and the space. That way, it's connecting to my space making ideas.
I don't know how that was for everyone else, but it didn't feed very well for me. It was a little glitchy, so I don't know if it played for everyone else on theirs. But it's funny, this particular video has been kind of it hasn't streamed well either time, so hopefully it got through. The idea did. Thanks for staying. Yeah, I have a couple specific questions, but I'd love to just hear what other people have for questions first.
Hi. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You said you plan on having the artwork is beautiful, by the way, but did you plan on having shelter there? Like is this for the Gatto Park, and is like a shelter you were proposing, or?
Yeah. So one question is where to put it. Gatto is one of the places that I think it would go really well. Also, the original idea was a thought about the levee breach site so that you could see over the levee. But I'm increasingly kind of feel like it would. I'm excited about the idea of it being Gatto. And so one of the questions in the survey that you could help me out with is answering where you think it's best or now. And so, yeah, the idea would be that it is kind of like a porch with a railing and a roof, and 3 different ones that are connected by ramps is the general working thought right now. It might end up getting to be 2, or that's sort of where I'm thinking. But yeah, shelter that you could then sit at a table under that shelter and raised up high.
Yeah, my main concern with that though would be the safety of that with kids in the park, as well as people made this, like some of our shelters in City Park, you find that people, vagrants or just anyone will, it's kind of like a hidden spot in, their homes around there. So if you can't see into it and what's going on there, it could be a place for things to go on that we may not, want going on in the neighborhood. So.
Yeah, so the thought is that there's no walls, but do you think that it still happens even if it's basically like posts and a roof, but you can see through it? Does it still seem like it poses that gathering problem?
Yeah, just posts with the roof maybe a better idea. I would just be concerned about it being raised though, as far as, safety and liability issues. That's the only, like when I saw it, that's what came to mind as far as kids in the park, and if it's, yeah. I mean, it's a great concept because I understand what you're saying about having the view of the water, that's not far. So I understand that concept. It's just from a safety standpoint, I'm not sure about it.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. That's definitely one of the, like, really getting clear on the specifications of that, and thinking about, you know, railings, but really making, you know, everyone feels comfortable with it. It's definitely important.
Erin and Alex, I know I keep calling on you all, but I know that there was a lot of desire in Fillmore Park amongst kids to have some kind of raised element in the play structure, sort of an observation tower of sorts, and just wondering what your conversations have been like, and any thoughts that you all have about kind of mitigating some of those safety concerns or challenges with something that's raised higher.
Yeah, so both at Fillmore and at Gatto right now, we do have sort of taller play towers, I guess, if you will. So Gatto's is a little bit more, because that's a little bit more focused on nature play. We have a climbing tower and then at Fillmore, it's a more traditional kind of tower with a slide and, you know, kind of different ways to climb it. So we do have some of those playground elements that incorporate that. And those are both, as you said, Sarah, in direct response to kind of kids' desire to like get up and see over, you know, and like expressing that in different ways that they drew things. I think you know, one thing that I've shared, I think before on some of the other proposals where, you know, we want to make things climbable or kind of playable and things like that, is just that there are very specific regulations that like landscape architects have to follow in terms of like fall zones and like kind of using that like blue stuff that you see as like pads around, you know, whatever the equipment is, and each of the pieces of equipment has like a specific fall zone that we are informed about, that we use to kind of design that. And so I think for us, it's more a matter of sort of saying, okay, well, when we don't, you know, I love the idea of like being able to sort of get up and over and see up and over, because again, I think it's something we heard over and over again. I think what I can't do is immediately say like, yeah, like we can make that great for kids without knowing exactly what the design is and kind of how tall it's going to be and what that would mean in terms of like some of the regulations and things we have to follow. So, but generally, like the idea of being able to see up and over, I think is a cool one. And I do also like the original idea of the levee breach site, just because I also agree that like being over on the other side of the levee is a really transformative experience. And so finding ways for people to have that, I think is also a really neat idea. So that I do think it could work in either of those contexts pretty well, but might be even more appropriate for a levee breach site if we are concerned about kind of kid-related safety issues at playgrounds.
Thanks, Alex.
One other, I have, you know, a couple of different, a variety of questions, but one that kind of came up in this conversation earlier was the sense of like whether it's possible that one or two of these structures could go up over, or if it's better to kind of tuck them in the trees if they were at, if it was at Gatto or Fillmore. But you know, what when you were speaking before, Erin, it seemed like that notion of them tucked in the trees is really the best integration of them. But curious if people have other thoughts, or you know, if it's possible to kind of go have them be in the bioswale, you know, in a way that doesn't mess with the functioning of the bioswale.
So I think in terms of having them be in the bioswale, I think a lot of it just depends on sort of the total footprint of the base, right? And then as well as like, how are people going to get to it? So how do you make sure that folks can access it without kind of like having to just like create their own sort of path through the plantings or whatever. But generally I don't see that as much of an obstacle. The main thing with the bioswale, right, is that water is supposed to flow through it. And so as long as there is a way for water to flow and it's not like totally blocking off, for example, like a whole horizontal section of the bioswale, there should be a way to do it. I do think that, you know, when you talk about things that are pretty tall, we're talking about kind of deep concrete footings. And so that might mess with it. So it's a little hard to speculate just on exactly again, sort of which elements of this might have issues. And I would definitely say that this is something where we're already having some conversations with one of our lead landscape architect on this project and some other artists. So I would be happy to kind of wrap this or anybody else who's kind of wondering about some of these things into those same kinds of conversations, because she's got even more experience with this than I do. But generally I see that as something that probably can work, but it is dependent on just, kind of the size of the footing you need, what it, like for the height of the thing, and what that would do to kind of the ability of the water to flow and the ability of us to have kind of the soils and things that we need to absorb the water into the ground.
Yeah, if that's, Caitlin, if that's something you're interested in pursuing, I know we're coordinating a call with Alex and Claire and Rachel, so maybe you can hop onto that one as well.
Yeah, I would love that. Cool. Thanks.
Trinity, Landry, do you guys have any additional thoughts on any of the proposals you've seen today, since you guys are joining for the first time?
Not yet. I think we're gonna have to go through the other videos and try to get a feel for it. So after this Zoom video, we'll go back and look at those.
Awesome. What about you, Peggy? You've been to all. You're the opposite. You've seen all the videos and seen all the art. Any thoughts?
Yeah, let me make a comment about the positioning of the sun. We were talking about this last time with Rachel. Our house faces west, and we have an etched glass front door. And on 2 days out of the year, on the spring solstice on March the 19th, and the spring equinox on March the 19th, and the fall equinox on September 22nd, the sun shoots directly through that etched glass door and down the hall, and we refer to it as door hinge. So for the artists who are looking about the positioning of their work in the park, March the 19th and September the 22nd, you're going to get a straight shot at the sun. June the 20th, it is the farthest north that the sun will get, and December the 31st is the farthest south that the sun will get. So that will reflect the direction that the light will be coming in the park. And the streets, Wingate and Wildair, are almost exactly 90 degrees due north. They're like 85. They're 85 rather than 90. So you're looking at true north when you look at either of those streets. So if that is any information that you can use in positioning your sculpture, the place that the sun will come from will change on the time of the day and the month of the year.
Yeah, that notion about the streets is really helpful, because that's it got kind of cut from the video, but tracking the seasons and having the equinoxes and the solstices be represented in that, so the light was coming through the bottles in the roof was a big part of what I'm thinking about. It's cool that it's happening in your house already. That's great.
It happens every year, and we can tell what season it is by whether the sun's coming through the north windows or the south windows of the house.
Yeah,
so
that's
I
great.
thought I'd pass that information along for anybody for whom that might be important.
Thanks.
And I know Rachel had to hop off, but I'll let her know to make sure she watches the last 5 minutes of this.
And that pinhole camera thing, it went fast, but there's a really cool way to, in a very simple way, in the space, get that tracking so that I can set up and yeah, so it's exciting to think about having that be represented there too.
All right. Well, I think that takes us to the end of our 4-part Meet the Artist series. I want to actually ask a quick question. So we have all of the videos on our website along with individual survey forms for each of the artists. Is there any information for those of you who have had a chance to look at the site? Is there any information or thoughts about, you know, navigating that site that might make it easier to kind of get through all the proposals or to provide feedback? Just any thoughts that you all have. I know we really want to push people to continue looking at our site and watching all those videos and offering input. But I'm just curious if anyone has thoughts about ways that we can, you know, improve the sites it's easiest to use and navigate for residents.
Now the events are over, it might be worth like flip-flopping the order of the material.
Right.
And I think the survey feedback hyperlinks may be a little hard to find amidst all the images and the videos.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much again, everyone, for offering your time and all of your insight. I know how much it means to all of these artists just hearing thoughts and ideas as they work towards final proposals. So just want to appreciate everyone for taking time and offering your thoughts and ideas.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for hosting and putting this on.
For sure.
A lot of work.
Thank you.
All right.
It's been a ton of fun to see all the proposals from all the artists. They're really amazing. So it's really
They are. Thank y'all.
been great.
Thank you guys.